Well, welcome back to the studio for Lesson 5 of the Form Gesture Anatomy course. In this session, we'll be changing gears a little bit. So, in the previous 4 sessions, we've been focused on the torso masses, the pelvis and the rib cage, and the relationship between them, and how they occupy space. We've been training ourselves in recognizing the important landmarks that are going to allow us to depict them. We've been practicing different ways of understanding them as masses in space and thinking a little bit about the subforms that fall across them as well and how to depict those subforms. But we've been thinking about them, we've been working on the figure from here and moving outwards into the limbs. In this session, we're going to build on that by putting down lines that instead of focusing only here and then working outwards, we're going to work from the outside in, and we're going to work from putting some very general broad curves down and building the torso into that. So everything that we've done previously has been critical to that project, but now we're seeing these masses in the broader context of how the limbs are relating to the torso. So let me show you what I mean just briefly. So the torso in this pose she has an arch to her back, so there's this general movement here. We can extend that line into the head and down into the leg. Now in this case it's one line that we can put, comfortably approximate the whole figure with this one curve to build the rest of the figure off by finding, say, the shoulders and the arm there. Perhaps we find the S curve on the front of this leg. I'll be talking about S curves in legs. It's very, very useful. And then across the top of the buttocks and around here. So these types of curves, we can build the general, establish the general figure here. It's not always as simple where we get one line that we can put down first to establish the whole figure. Often it takes a few, but we want to minimize that because this, like this previous project where we were using this approach to the torso to get ourselves off the edge and copying the edges and sort of being a bit not directed and efficient about what we're doing, because we've only got a short space of time when we're working from life, and it's so important to be able to capture as much of the richness and think in a structural way, think in a powerful way. This is similar, so we're using simple lines, and this is what I'll be talking about next, is going through the types of lines and the types of relationships of lines. For instance, this curve being parallel to that curve. This is a pattern that you might notice. It helps us to be accurate, but it's also part of an aesthetic pattern that we can utilize in designing a picture and designing a figure. And then I'll be putting this into practice, and you'll see how useful it can be to start with some broad lines like this and to use this to establish the figure. So you can think of this as, it's an efficient technique, it's a way of practicing, it's a way of seeing more clearly and sensitizing your eye. But it's also, I think, where things really start to get interesting, because we are now not just thinking about the torso itself, but we're thinking about how it is relating to the overall figure, how the limbs and the engineering of the body, for example, how the weight of the far leg is supporting her and pushing that side of her hip up, and the stretch is happening through the other side of her body, all of the force that she's using to bring her shoulder back around behind her back. There's a lot that's happening there that is both abstract and aesthetic. It's the engineering of the pose, and it's what she's feeling, what she's doing that's so relevant. So let's get straight into it, and I'll go through the types of lines, the types of relationships of lines that can be useful here. So some points about seeing the figure in terms of design elements. So the types of lines that we're going to be using here, we're going to limit ourselves to 3 lines, and we're going to make those lines as long as possible. So the first thing I want to go through is just what those lines are and what this really means. So the first one is going to be this, just a simple C curve. The second one is going to be an S curve followed by one C followed by a second C, which is our S curve, and then the straight line, of course. Okay, so this is what we're really looking to find in the figure and to break the figure down into. And these curves are going to have relationships between them. So there's an important concept here that we'll go into in a second, and that is of counterbalance. So counterbalance just means that one curve flows into another curve. So there's kind of this idea that at this point, this curve is parallel to that curve, and then it changes direction. This is something that we see showing up in the human body and in nature all the time. So here we have our curves. Now, what I want you to understand is that along the edge of the body, there may well be, there's of course lots more detail than we're seeing here. So there might well be a curve like this with a projection, for example, an elbow coming through, okay? But the idea that we're going for here is the general. We're looking for the way that this curve flows generally through the figure. So we might have something like this going on with the arm. So even though there are more lumps and bumps, what we're looking for is the general way that it flows down through here into the hand. Okay, so let's look at the figure and look for some of the patterns that show up in one of the classic patterns that we see in the figure from the side is the S-curve on the front of the leg. So what does this look like? So because the quadricep is a large mass that's projecting from the point of the hip, we'll have this idea of this curve flowing down into the front of the leg there. So there'll be this curve outwards that will be counterbalanced by the back of the leg coming through this way. The extensor group of the lower leg is smaller than the calf, the soleus muscle. So this will flow down through into here, and we'll end up with falling down here, finding the heel, arch the foot into the toes, and we've got the buttock, of course, hamstring groups coming down into here. So we have this, but the general flow of the leg is this one that flows down through here. So the idea is that when you're drawing a leg, often you'll see this S-curve will show up, and the first line that you put down can be this S-curve, and then you fill that in by adding on the extra parts and adding in extra detail. But the first thing that we're looking for is the general, okay? And then we can refine things and improve the shape of them like this. Now, let's go further up into the figure. So beyond this S-curve, if someone's standing in a neutral position, we'll tend to have a general curve back like this. So why is that? Well, the pelvis, okay, if we take the top of the pelvis here and look through there, going down through the sacrum, down in towards the buttock here, this is tilted sort of forward, so there's a general tilt forward in a neutral position, and then there's a slight arch to the back because the rib cage will tend to lean backwards. So somebody standing with, in a fairly neutral position will do this. So there's kind of a counterbalance happening here, where you have a movement around the buttock here that is counterbalancing with the front of the body, with where the abdominals are coming through, and then that counterbalance flows into the back of the shoulders here. So that's a very important pattern to notice here. The chest leading forward, the top rib will be kind of at an angle, something like this. So then when we go up further, we can follow this curve around. The neck will tend to come forward slightly, and then we'll find the chin and up and around the back of the head here. Okay, so we can think about the front of the face as having a sort of a general curve that flows into the back of the head here as well. And so of course there are, if we find our brow line here, and we find where the eye level is, there will be a projection for the brow, there will be a projection for the nose, and perhaps where the mouth is. But the idea is that there's a general curve that we can follow around through here as well. Okay, and the position of the ear towards the back there. Okay, so then looking at the arm, as I sort of roughly mentioned here, we've got this flow that we can look for in a sort of a naturally held arm. There's going to tend to be a slight movement towards the front, won't be dead straight, and there will be a general movement like this with the quadricep, large muscle group at the back of the arm, flowing down into the flexor group of the forearm. So this tends to flow down in this way. So we have this general sweep forward, and you'll notice that with the shoulder, the deltoid muscle coming down, there's a bit more of a sort of some lumps and bumps here, and what we see is this general flow down through here that tends to follow the back of the arm. Not always, depending on the individual. You know, someone who's very lean might be not as obvious as this, but that's the general flow that we're looking for in here. Okay, so another point that I wanted to make is that this idea of counterbalancing is an important one, and a great example of this is in the leg when we see it from the front. So if you consider that when somebody stands with their legs, two legs together, there'll be the crutch, there'll be the knees, and there'll be the ankles where there'll be points touching. And so what we'll see is that there'll be this the side going up through here. If this is the crutch, our pelvis will be sort of coming out to this point. This is about where the greater trochanter is, and this is about where the iliac crest, the anterior spines of the pelvis are kind of come through here, and this is where our greater trochanter is. So if you consider that the leg is really from here downwards, and so this is, even though this belongs to the pelvis, it also belongs to the thigh. And what you'll see is this curve that sort of comes out, flows through down towards the knee, and there's a counterbalance where this moves around here, because we have this the adductor group coming in and meeting the inside of the knee here. So the knee will be somewhere here, right, with the patella, the fatty pads underneath the knee, and then we'll see the leg starting to come back the other direction. So the tibia, the major bone of the lower leg, will flow down through here from the inside of the knee, and we'll come down to the inner ankle, the inner malleolus, okay, and on the inside of that we'll have the calf muscle, and on the outside we have the outer malleolus. So what we're seeing here with the big toe on the inside now is a pattern where this volume is counterbalanced by this volume. So we have 1, 2, 3, and you could even say 4, so that the shape is tapering and it is counterbalancing. So as we move further down through the leg, and so what you actually tend to see here is that there's a kind of if you consider this region here, there is a kind of there's a place where this is more parallel to this, and then there's a place where this is more parallel to this, and then we go across to here, and so we're alternating. We're going down like this. So this is a very important pattern. It's a very obvious one in the leg, and you will see things like this happening in the arm and other parts of the body as well. So these anatomical patterns. Now, another point that I wanted to make is that when we look at a figure from the front who isn't standing with their hips horizontal, okay, who is standing with their weight on one leg. So if we were to go from being a standing figure with both legs more or less together, standing square to us, and we've said, let's make this figure with their weight more like this, so their hips are tilted, what will tend to happen is that this leg will come in underneath them, whereas this one will be relaxed and allowing them to stand to balance. Okay, so, and then what happens is that the pelvis will be tilted like this, with the upper body going the opposite direction. Okay, so we have this opposition, and we'll have this big curve that happens through through the torso like this. Now, what happens is that when the rib cage is tilted like this, you can see that what's happening is that between here and here, this side of the rib cage is being more exposed. Okay, so this side is sort of tucking down into the soft tissues of the pelvis. There could well be some compression folds here going around the side of the hip here. And on this side, we'll see the rib cage projecting through a little bit more because the soft tissues are being pulled down and away from the rib cage there. And so what we get is that this curve becomes emphasized, so that this curve is very important, whereas this one is not being projected out like that. We don't. Instead, it's actually going inwards. So this is a classic contrapposto pattern. So if you think about this in terms of the counterbalance of arcs, we'll have an arc that goes around like this, and then an arc that goes around like this. So we've got this counterbalance from one side to the other side. This is a very useful thing to get used to seeing, because then as soon as you notice that, your eye just tunes straight into it, and you're not having to discover it. It's something that you just recognize and can make sure that you include, because it's dramatic and beautiful, and whatever else that you're looking at, that pattern is something that you just absolutely pick up on and feel. So what I've given you here are a series of patterns that have to do with the general ways that the body organizes itself. So there tends to be these what I call anatomical patterns, and then there's patterns that exist that involve these general curves, C curve, S curve, and straight lines, and counterbalancing, the tapering of things, the way that there's this alternating of movements. This tends to happen all across the figure and can extend out from these patterns, so that we can actually see these curves flowing into across the parts of the body as well. So one of the final point that I'd like to make before we go on and see some of those things in action is that if we don't look for these counterbalances, what will happen? We'll have a sense in which volumes, and this is what I do see with students sometimes, is that volumes will tend to do this. Okay? So that we're just seeing, and this is not the pattern that we see in sort of mammalian or vertebrate anatomy. What we see is something where this side is not in fact equal to that side, and then this side is not equal to that side. So we have this pattern where they're offset from each other. This is a very important idea, and it's a very important thing to think about when you're trying to consider the design elements of the figure, that there's always one side opposing the other side.